All right, good evening, and thank you for joining us on the Social Zee Franchise Happy Hour. Again, I'm Calvin Smith, your host, and today I've got two of my closest friends as our guests. We've got Bob Schneider and Steve Lofvers joining us. Steve is down in Daytona Beach, Florida, and Bob is over in the Boulder area of Colorado. Bob and Steve, thank you guys for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
So our topics today are going to be about how to work on your business versus in your business as a franchise owner, and then also how you make that transition to more of an absentee owner and moving your franchise into the asset column versus in the job column. So that's going to be our topics. As we get going here, I will throw out topics to you guys. I'll stop you whenever the countdown ends, and then we'll figure out some way to keep score. I don't know if it's going to be taking shots or what, but we'll figure that out. So to get going here, what I'd ask you to do is tell us what you're drinking and what did you do before your franchise business.
So I have something called Old St. Pete, and it's a vodka out of St. Petersburg, Florida. And it's actually my first time having it, but so far it's going down just right. Prior to going the franchise route, I actually worked in property insurance. I kind of started there very early in my career after college and started at the bottom, was a property adjuster and worked my way into management. It was actually a very good industry, and they offered me a lot of opportunities. They paid for my MBA. It opened doors for me to actually relocate to the home office and work on things at a much higher level, and was there for about 8 or 9 years and decided to make the jump over to a business owner.
Awesome. Thanks, Steve. Bob, what about you?
Yeah, I got Tin Cup. I don't have my bottle with me, but it's a straight rye whiskey. Somewhere in the mountains of Colorado it's from, but kind of local. But one of my favorites, so I'll definitely be enjoying one of those tonight. So before buying into CertaPro, I was in private equity investing. Doing the diligence and actually transaction execution side, and then working with the management teams after buying the company. Before that, I was out in New York doing the investment banking rat race a little bit. So on the M&A advisory side, and also in the leverage finance group, financing deals. So more of a finance background, but joined right around the same time as Steve here.
Bob's a little humble, but one of the reasons Steve and I enjoy hanging out with him is he's one of the few Ivy Leaguers we met that doesn't mention that he went to Princeton in every conversation. So we appreciate that.
Yeah, you got it.
Awesome. So I am actually drinking out of this weird little cup here, Jefferson's Straight Up. It's a good little mixed batch bourbon out of Kentucky. Pretty smooth. It's enjoyable. So I'll hopefully finish this glass by the time we finish this conversation. So kind of getting into the nuts and bolts here, moving on. Bob, why don't you kick us off and tell us a little bit about your current business and where you're at.
I've got 3 CertaPro territories. I just acquired the third one late last year, and we've got 2 offices. We're up to 12 office staff, 20 plus crews. So we're, 5 times as big as when I bought it. And part of that through acquisition, part of it through growth. But no, it's been really fun. A lot of changes, a lot of learning at the same time. But we're in a good place right now. Really good market. Feel like we've got a really good team in place, so I'm sure we'll touch on that quite a bit more later. But we just are still digesting the newest acquisition, but made a lot of progress in the past 6 months. So excited about where that's going. We've got the 2 offices. So we have some office managers. We've got 3 on the production management side, and then we've got, I think, 5 people selling at this point. And then the others are on the kind of biz dev commercial marketing side. So that rounds out the team outside of me. Fortunate at this point to not be in what we call at CertaPro an associate role. So I am not out day to day strictly selling or strictly doing production management. I'm supporting all of the roles, I guess, but for the most part, it's on the personnel side. So individual development, training, coaching. I'm still involved when we do bring on a new team member. So on the obvious overall strategy side as an owner, but it's all turned to the personnel side for me. And when we talk about working on versus in, I think that's the biggest lever to pull. So it's a fun part. It's what I like the most about the business too. So it's a fun place in the kind of path on the business to be in.
Steve, you're kind of on the other end of the spectrum as far as where you're at as your role, but definitely a business owner, not in the associate role. So can you tell us a little bit about your business and what you do in the day-to-day in the franchise and in your other businesses?
Sure. Yeah, so I do have multiple businesses, just like Calvin just mentioned. So with the franchise, I started it from scratch. There was not a prior owner or anything like that. So it definitely started out where it all fell onto my shoulders, and you get to experience wearing different hats that you've never had before. I've never done sales prior to this, and it was a little bit of an adjustment and everything. And slowly, I've owned the business for just under 6 years now, and it's kind of gone. It's not a straight line, right? So it's every year we seem to bring somebody on who has long-term potential, and then unfortunately one reason or another they don't work out or something along those lines. So right now our staff is actually a little bit less than it was last year. We have myself, we have a production slash sales slash office admin person who pretty much does all of the day-to-day stuff, and then we just recently backfilled a position for somebody who's going to be dedicated to 100% to the sales. It's honestly right now, even though we're small, I pretty much work remote exclusively, and my production person is basically running the day-to-day. And it's really tough to find somebody who fits the business model like that, but for me it's worked out extremely well. We're substantially smaller than Bob is, which is obviously our goal is to grow, but right now we're actually able to hit pretty good numbers using our top line. Definitely isn't as high, but our bottom line's actually doing pretty well right now. So we don't have too many expenses coming in around staff or vehicles or anything like that. So I'm not sure exactly how aggressively we're going to be growing in the future. We're just going to kind of take it year by year and see how it develops.
I think all of us have learned as we've gotten deeper into the business ownership model and the franchise model in general, is to shift our focus from that top line number to the bottom line, right? And where Bob growing that bottom line through growth and acquisition and strategy, you've taken a different approach where it's focus on efficiencies and optimizing your row and time and things like that. But both of you are certainly making more money than when you started. So that's awesome. Let's talk about the last 14 to 16 months and really 2020 and how that changed for all of us, right? Everyone's business changed significantly. Knowing you as well as I do, both of your businesses changed dramatically, I think, for the better. And so, Steve, why don't you kick us off and just kind of talk a little bit about how, once COVID hit, how your business changed and, what the significant changes are, and then we'll kind of go from there.
Yeah, so for us, right off the bat, our area was affected pretty heavily. The county that we were located in required us to actually close down for a few weeks, which was unexpected and everything. And I ended up attempting to not furlough any employees, but it was a little bit short-lived. So after a few weeks, I did end up furloughing our sales staff, and it kind of made sense. And then our intention was to bring them back. However, as things started progressing and things started opening up, we started getting a little creative and really started embracing things that we hadn't done in the past. So, for example, we used to always go to the customer's house to do an estimate in person, and we started utilizing online tools, Google Maps, things like that to actually measure homes, and started doing a lot of things virtually. And these are things that we've been challenged in the past. We've kind of considered, but it actually never came to fruition until we were essentially forced into using them. And surprisingly, it was wildly successful. So it's kind of rechanged our focus going forward. And so far, we got a lot of momentum off of that. We were able to make things work with less staff. And then we actually were able to open the doors and bring on some more virtual staff to help out. And I'd say that the business has been smoother now than we've ever been. And we're just kind of killing it this year. I mean, we've already booked more work in the first 4 months of this year than we did all of last year. So, yeah, it's been great.
Absolutely. Yeah, one of the key things about being an entrepreneur is you don't have an option to not figure it out, right? And where it was stressful, you guys did a great job of looking at your situation and adapting and coming out better for it. So that's awesome. And Bob, you had a big year, big change over the last 14 months as well, kind of going the other direction, and did as good as anybody managing a full team plus through COVID, and I don't think you actually lost anybody, and I think you expanded, right?
Yeah. So we fortunate enough, we definitely got impacted, but we didn't have to formally shut down. We were considered an essential business. So definitely got slow for a little while, but it was I almost say simple decision, not an easy one, but I pretty quickly decided and told everyone. Obviously, I don't know where the train would stop on how things were going. Nobody knew what was going to happen back in March of 2020, but I made it clear that my intentions were to keep the team intact, and some really bad things would have to happen for that to not be the case. Put a lot of time, work into building the team that we have now, and they're really good. And I didn't want a big event, but something like that to disrupt my longer term multi-year plan. So we did not furlough or lay off anyone. I did take a little bit of the opposite approach, and had to talk to my wife about it and say, hey, are you okay with potentially not making any money to keep the things on the right path for the long term? And fortunately that didn't happen, but we did make the decision. I brought on a business development person, I want to say April 2nd. I had already been interviewing her beforehand, but I looked at it and said, yes, it'll be slow for a few months, but a lot of companies won't make it through or out of COVID, and that means a lot of customers are going to be without their normal service provider, and there would be some holes for us to hopefully fill. And so I'm sure some people would look at that and say, not the smartest move for near-term profitability, but I guess with my long-term plans, I'd rather sacrifice a little bit of that front for the long-term positioning and market share. So we were fortunate. I think just barely, but we grew last year still versus 2019. So I think our team was pretty proud of that given the circumstances. So and then second big piece was kind of going into the offensive mode and buying the third business territory. It was an existing one, came with some staff, and interesting time to buy it, but I think there's a lot of upside opportunity. So it's worked out really well so far. Had some new hires since then, and super excited about the broader group of people we have now. So I think in retrospect, I'm happy with all the decisions, even though it definitely took some critical thinking, I'll say, in the interim last year.
And Bob, if you were in your business doing estimates and in the associate role, you wouldn't have had time to make those decisions, right? And been able to focus on those things. And Steve, you as well. When you're working on your business at a high level, you're able to make better decisions for the long term. So let's talk a little bit about what that looks like and how you made the transition from being an associate or being in the business in the weeds.
Yeah. So my first thought is it doesn't happen overnight, and so a lot of what I kind of focused on was really there's different components to when you're doing everything. There's different components that really a specific person could fill that role, whether it's sales, whether it's production, accounting, things like that. So when you start out, you're doing everything yourself, and you kind of have to learn. You have to really think on the fly a lot. But slowly but surely, we ended up bringing on one person to take over the sales component, then another person to do production. And honestly, what I've kind of learned is sometimes I even put those people a little bit too much in a silo, and they are comfortable branching out into other departments or other positions that I originally didn't think would make sense. But once I felt that somebody was up and running and ready, that's when I'd almost immediately move on to the next position and trying to fill that. And like I said, right now I have very limited staff, but it's split up in a way where I do not have to do the day-to-day stuff. I happen to have trained the people I have long enough, and they're good enough where I can just focus on the higher level business plan stuff, some of the issues that come up, but really that's not my role. That's their role.
And Bob, with you, buying an existing turf, it sounds like you started off more on the ownership side from day one. How has that changed since you started to where you are now with 3 areas and a huge team?
Yeah. So mine was a little different than Steve. So he bought a new territory. I bought a resale. So it was an existing business, but it came with one person, and we transitioned out of that within a handful of months. So I definitely kind of did a role until I grew out of it by hiring someone else and training them and replacing my old position. I think it was pretty eye-opening when kind of the first time I got to the point of having, someone in the office, someone on the sales side, someone on the production side. And it was like the first time that I got to say, hey, I'm working on the business instead of in the business. And the workload definitely doesn't drop off a cliff all of a sudden. It's almost like in my view, if you're doing it right, you can work just as much on the business as you do in the business. And if you don't have that attitude, that probably means, I'm not doing enough on the business. There's always something to do on that side. And a lot of it turns to personnel. So whether it's business planning or strategy type things or making new acquisitions, sure, that's always on the table. But if in doubt, there's always something to do on the personnel side with your team. So I quickly realized that's what I actually like the most. So I don't mind at all spending most of my time there, and I think it's worked out well because it helps people, in their individual development. It helps staff retention, and it helps performance too, because my whole role becomes how do I support them being successful? Because them being successful means that they're going to like it more, they're more likely to stay, and obviously helps drive the business too.
Absolutely. Looking back, now that you both are 6 years into it now, would you have made those decisions quicker or any differently, or what would you have changed to get to the point you are now on a either a quicker path or a more profitable path? How would that have changed for you now that you know what you know?
I can go first on that one because I have easy answers.
Go ahead, Bob.
Okay. I don't think decisions on when to hire someone or what position would have changed. I think I've learned quite a bit on what I'm really looking for in an employee or in a team member. So, not every single person I hired worked out, kind of like Steve alluded to a bit. The team we have now is amazing, but it took a few iterations to get there on certain positions. So I think the biggest thing would have been how I handled interviewing, what my kind of priorities and standards are in a new team member. And I think that probably just only came from experience. Had interviewing experience in a different industry, different role, different company, and it doesn't translate to this type of business. So what I thought would be a strong suit, if I'm being honest, was probably a bit of a weakness in the beginning, and that would have been the biggest thing I would have probably done a little different.
Kind of building off a little bit of what he's saying, but in hindsight, if I could do things over, I would definitely. There's a lot of mistakes that I made that I would avoid if I could do it over again. However, I really think that's part of being an entrepreneur is you have to be comfortable with failure. And it's those minor, small failures that may seem like the end of the world at the time, but you learn off of those and you build and you just keep pushing forward. And sometimes it's personnel, sometimes it's other things. But I considered myself a pretty good manager before, I joined the franchise world, and I thought I knew some pretty good managers. But I without a doubt, the people I've met that are business owners, especially the successful ones, are way stronger leaders than I had ever seen in a corporate world. And I think it's because, you're forced to power through this. You can't push it off on somebody else. You have to come up with the solutions yourself. And you're the one that really you're accountable. So if your people don't learn, it's really, it falls on your shoulders. And it doesn't matter, even, if you're working in the business or working on the business, you're still going to be, ultimately, you're the final decision. So,
that willingness to take a risk is a big part of it, right? And, looking back, I certainly regret not making more riskier decisions more than I have ever regretted taking a risky one, right? As a business owner, going back, 5 or 6 years now for each of you, would you have taken more risk and made some more pushes, or would you have stayed with what you have?
It's an interesting question because I think for sure I would have loved to. But I think that I actually needed that corporate structure first to really understand what I wanted out of. Because it sounds terrible, but sometimes I used to feel like I was almost in prison a little bit, like I'm tied to the desk and I'm not allowed out. It's a beautiful day outside and I get an hour for my lunch, but the rest of the day I have to be behind the computer. And life is very different now. So I think that I almost needed the background in the route that I went, because I didn't, when I was growing up, I had no intentions of owning a business. I really thought that the corporate world was the route for me, and it's the trial and error that really opened my eyes. So I think my timing was actually pretty good for my life status.
Bob, what about you? Any different risks, or would you have taken more risks, less risks? Where would you have gone?
I guess I view it differently. I don't know if I would call it taking risk, but I think in terms of quote unquote standard CertaPro, I probably did take a lot of risk in terms of hiring people in advance of what the standard would be. So yeah, if we didn't produce that year, guess what? I'm not making much money at all. Now, thankfully, it worked out, and we had great teams, and we grew into the positions that I hired. But I don't think that I'd redo anything within CertaPro in terms of the risk taking side. Was it always popular, or did I get some feedback that I might be crazy? Yeah, but for what I wanted to do, and was I willing to sacrifice some things to be able to get to the position sooner of working on versus in? Yeah, so I would do that again.
Absolutely. If you had the knowledge you have now would you go back and buy a franchise, or would you start your own business?
So I would do the franchise again. I'm a believer, and obviously it's a huge difference on finding a good franchisor and a mediocre franchisor. Specific to CertaPro, I think, it's a good franchisor and I get value out of it. I looked at other franchise concepts and franchise systems. Some of them were less than impressive, and I could see going into that industry and then walking away 2 years later saying, why did I buy into a franchise concept? So if it's a good franchisor, I'm a believer. I think there's quite a bit of value in brand and software and marketing. And then the learning and development side, I'm a pretty big fan of, for myself, but, trying to get to the point of having a professionally managed business where I'm not in the business at all. Having the learning and development piece for my team members to go through and develop in is really big, and you're not going to get that piece as an individual business. So definitely pros and cons, but I would do the franchise again.
Absolutely. And Steve, as someone who's built successful businesses outside of the franchise model now, what's your...
Yeah, that's why it was interesting to get Bob's take first, because obviously he's got multiple of the same business and everything. So it's funny because I actually would do the franchise route again, but for a completely different reason. So I personally believe that the true value of the franchise is the other owners, and just having people to lean on. They're the ones that are kind of going through what you're going through at the same time. So when you have issues, you can discuss it, you can debate it. I think that's actually worth way more than the actual corporate software and stuff like that they provide. So that's my take. But I have done both, and I don't know. I think that the franchise would, if I had to do it over again, I would definitely do the franchise again. So.
Last couple questions here, guys. Going into the second half of this year, coming out of COVID, what's going to be the biggest challenges for your businesses?
I'll go first. So for us, because we're having such wild success in 2021, my biggest challenge is really kind of figuring out how much of this is related to just growth of the business, really establishing some really good relationships, which I truly believe we have. We have the infrastructure in place, or we have the personnel and the subcontractors and everything, versus how much of this success this year is just a bottleneck from 2020. So it's made me hesitant to get too excited over the growth. And if I were to put together a 2022 plan right now, I'd probably have it closer to 2020 than 2021, just because there's too many unknowns out there. I hope, obviously, I'm hopeful that it's going to continue, and I want to be optimistic, but I also want to be realistic.
Right. So not knowing, we knew last year's numbers weren't real. Not knowing if this year's numbers are real is the big question mark, right? Yeah. Bob,
Exactly.
what about you?
Yeah, so I think two things. One, and is partly related to the acquisition, but we've got 3 new people up there with 100% new processes. So we're in the middle of going into our first busy season with mostly new staff in that office and all new processes. So working the kinks out of that will be one. We're making great progress. We've also got the other office with the history to kind of copy. So I'm confident we'll successfully get through that. I think the other big one, we're having a great year in terms of bookings so far. Weather has also not been great. So the combination of the two is going to make production capacity a big item that we're focusing on. We're not in a terrible place right now or anything, but I guess it's a good problem to have. We have great sales staff. They're trained. The market's good, and they're doing a great job. So we just need to be able to feed the beast and have the crews and capacity to actually get the work done. we're pretty seasonal. I don't have your background right now, so sometimes we can't work outside, and we have a short window to get it all done. So managing to do that and keep our standards of quality and customer service up at the same time is going to be, it'll be a good challenge this year.
Absolutely. So positives on the growth and the sales, but with that, the challenge then becomes how do you produce it, right? And sometimes it's the other way. How do we get the sales and keep up with our production capacity? So, well, thank you both again for taking the time to visit with us. Again, you both are great examples on different ends of the spectrum of how you can build a very profitable business working on it versus in it, and how you can enjoy what you're doing, enjoy showing up every day, and not be stressed out in the weeds and hating life. So thanks for your time, and we look forward to talking to you guys again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.